Welcome to the PAVE Podcast. Join us as we explore innovative biblical strategies and revolutionary tools to empower you to be a catalyst for church growth. Be inspired by church growth practitioners who are expanding God's kingdom in their communities and around the world. Now here's your host, Jonathan L. Smith.
Welcome to the PAVE Podcast. I'm Jonathan Smith, the Director of Church Health and Growth at Texas Baptist, the Baptist General Convention of Texas. The PAVE Podcast is made possible by your gifts to the cooperative program and also your generous gifts to the Mary Hill Davis offering. At the PAVE Podcast and in PAVE, we help churches find new paths for church growth. Today, I am honored to have my friend Lee Williams III to join me today. Lee is a strategist with Texas Baptist, but I like to refer to you as a unicorn.
Yes.
Don't take that personally. And that is because Lee has successfully planted a church and successfully revitalized a church. And so we'll talk more about that. But I do want to say my friend Lee has a certain collection. I think you're the only person that I know that has this collection. You want to tell them what it is?
You have to be talking about the glasses.
You got to look right into the camera when you say it, I think.
You have to be talking about the glasses.
I got some new glasses last week, and I thought about you. I was like, should I send a picture to Lee and ask? So how many pair of glasses do you have?
Right now, in my possession, 20.
Exactly 20. In your possession.
In my possession. There's some that are being shipped right now.
Okay, so it really is that's your trademark.
You know, the wife allowed me to do sneakers and frames.
Okay.
In exchange for not getting the motorcycle.
Oh, that's fair, and it's much safer.
It's much safer.
it's much safer.
Yeah.
Well, I have my own shtick. See what I did there?
Yeah.
You want to tell them?
So you're the chapstick guy, and
Yeah.
I've always wanted to ask, how did that become a thing?
Oh, so I have more than 300 chapstick from around the world, truly.
Wow.
I'll have friends who will go places around the world and they'll bring me back a chapstick. I live vicariously by, people bringing me chapstick. It got started by a friend of mine, one of my staff members, our children's minister, where I was senior pastor. I mentioned chapstick from the stage and you mentioned cherry, and she had found strawberry and gave me strawberry. And from the stage, I used strawberry and said, that tastes pretty good. And then people just started bringing me chapstick, and it kind of went on from there. So yeah, that's my addiction. But my wife likes it because I always have nice soft lips, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a trophy case of chapstick.
Just about. I have chapstick everywhere. But the bad thing is when you washing your chapstick's okay. Drying your chapstick, yeah, that's when you get in trouble with your wife. Just saying. So that there's a little bit of danger. That's more motorcycle compared to your glasses and shoes. But anyways, we digress. So hey, today on the PAVE Podcast, we are talking about church revitalization versus church replanting. Now, the role that Lee has at Texas Baptist is he is a church starting strategist for Central Texas. And as I said, Lee has been a part of revitalization. In fact, Lee is one of our coaches for PAVE, coaching pastors and churches in revitalization, but has also been involved with planting and replanting. I'm going to say real fast, replanting is not that's not my expertise. My expertise, quote unquote, is in revitalization, church health and growth. But what we want to do today, there are pastors out there who may be wondering, am I revitalization or am I replant? And we want to help you understand today some different characteristics of each so that by the end, you might have a better idea of which route to go. Because we face this all the time in the work that we do. Yeah, we face it daily. So let's start just kind of unfolding some of the differences. What do you want to lead with? Replanting or revitalization?
Let's do replanting.
Okay.
And the truth is, those lines get so blurry.
They are very blurry.
They're so blurry. And so don't, to the pastor that's watching or listening, don't become overwhelmed not being able to decide which way to go. There are people who can ask specific questions and look at the situation and tell you which way you need to go, because there are many areas where those lines get really blurred. So with replanting, there's 5 indicators that we look for. We look for a name change, So new name of the church.
Right.
You want a new location. You want a new target group or people that you are looking to reach. You want new set of strategies.
Right.
You also want new leadership. And
Right.
in most cases, that means the pastor as well
Right.
would need to be new.
So let's backtrack there a little bit. A church that needs to be replanted has probably been in decline for a really long time.
Yes.
So we at Texas Baptist, and maybe you're listening today, you're a part of Texas Baptist, maybe you're not, but still, the people who work on these issues are people like myself, yourself. Tom Howard, our director of church starting and restarting, is an incredible high expert in all these issues. So we have found kind of some metrics, if you will, to help understand.
Mm-hmm.
So let's back up a little bit. So that church has probably been in decline for how long?
For a number of years. When we're considering a church for replant, we're looking for a generation life cycle.
Right.
So you're looking at someone who is, 50 years old,
Yeah.
a church that's 40 or 50 years. That's an automatic indicator that we probably should be considering a replant.
Yeah, and when I teach on the revitalization side, and we're going to stick with one thing at a time, but when in revitalization, I'm always saying, look, the longer the church has been in existence, the more likely it's going to be to be revitalized or replanted.
Mm-hmm.
But for a church to be replanted, even in this post-COVID age, what's the attendance kind of down to? And we're going to have to speak in some generalities because every situation is different. But general rule of thumb: how many people? What's the remnant of people that are left in this congregation?
In most cases, when we see these situations, we're looking at a church that has a congregation of less than 20.
Yeah,
More likely, you're looking at almost single digits. Your average attendance is somewhere around 12 or 15.
right.
And those are normally your faithful, long-serving, long-time.
Sure.
We're holding on, just trying to make it happen.
Yeah.
And that's normally what we're seeing. And it's not a pandemic number or a post-pandemic number. It's the life cycle of that church and what they've come to.
Yeah. So, and typically, if our viewers, our listeners, if you're familiar with the church life cycle at all, you know it. We won't deal with the growth side because that's not what this podcast mostly is about. So at the top of the arc, a church is at sustained health. And as it begins to kind of fall off in spiritual direction and obedience to the Great Commission, as it begins to fall off, it's maintenance mode, and then it's preservation mode, and then life support. And so typically, whenever we're going to be replanting a church, they've kind of fallen into that life support mode.
Right, absolutely. They have just enough money to stay open.
Yeah.
No new programs.
Right.
No new people. No new vision. It's
Right.
just we're sustaining off of the legacy of the church.
Sure. And this can happen. I mean, I know churches that have seating capacity for over 1,000 that are down to, 50 or less.
Correct.
And so sometimes, again, general rule of thumb, 20 to 25 or less for replanting, but sometimes the size of the facility just mandates that we have to have a whole fresh new start, right?
Right.
What are some of the other characteristics of a church that might need to be in the replanting category?
That they have an opportunity to thrive again,
Yeah,
but something just needs to be changed.
right.
You have a great statement that challenged me 2 years ago:
Okay.
tweaking versus changing.
Yeah.
and tweaking is not changing.
Right.
And so, one of the things that I think personally grips my heart is the word replanting is now such a trendy word.
Yeah.
People think, oh, we just messed up and what we tried didn't work. Let's just start over and replant.
Okay.
And that's not necessarily what it is.
Right.
You're looking at a dynamic where you need someone to come in and help you all literally turn this thing all the way around, start over fresh, clean slate, and almost take nothing from your previous journey into your new.
Yeah, I mean, in replanting, it's difficult to say, but I think what I'm going to say is accurate. You can certainly disagree with me, and,
Sure.
and I welcome you to if you feel that way. But really, we're recognizing in replanting that the church cannot turn around on its own.
No.
So there's just not enough energy, finances, people that the church is going to need. The church is either died or just about died. And if the church doesn't do something at this point, then the church will end up just locking its doors and walking away.
Absolutely.
And we have those stories, even here in the the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, Texas. We have many of those stories of churches that are just locking their doors and walking away.
Mm-hmm. And the challenge is, and the scary thing is, some people don't realize with what little bit of life they have left, or I don't want to say it like that, what remaining life they still have.
Sure.
To do the work of the kingdom, to advance the kingdom agenda. This is the time to start planning for the future versus mourning the past.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's something to Jesus' teaching, right? He gathers 12 disciples around him.
Yeah.
That's what he launches with. And so now we also know that John, of course, had some disciples as well. And so they tended to work together. And when many disciples of Jesus gathered together, the 72 of them were all sent out at the same time. Mm-hmm. My point is this, that if Jesus started with 12, and we're talking, 25 or less, we're really kind of following a pattern of Jesus, that if it gets beneath that, Jesus had something special with 12, right?
Right.
So we need to kind of pay attention to that. Okay, so you said earlier, in order for Texas Baptist to replant, or to even really have some opening conversations with you about replanting, the church has to pre-agree to 3 out of these 5 dynamics.
Correct.
I'll go through them. You tell me if I get them right or not. Okay. A new name.
Mm-hmm.
All new leadership, which is probably going to include the pastor.
Correct.
So new name, new leadership, sometimes a new location, though that doesn't happen very often. Then the next one is a new target group.
Correct.
My understanding of target group, as I kind of teach some of this about replanting as well, we're not talking about we want to reach our community. It's going to be much more specific than that, right? So help our listeners understand, when we say target group, how specific do we mean?
We mean real specific. You have to identify who are you called to reach.
Who and where,
and
right?
where.
Yeah.
I remember, Jonathan, when we planted the Launch Church, and I was sitting down with Gary Patterson.
Okay.
And so we're talking about the demographic, right, or the target group. And he says, well, what area are you going to? I said, I'm going to the airport area. He's like, you're going to the airport? I said, yeah, God told me airport area because there was no Baptist churches really with. He was like, okay, well, let's talk about your radius. I'm like, okay, let's do 10 miles. And he laughed.
Right.
And I'm like, what's so funny, Doc? He said, you want to do a 10-mile radius? Like, yeah. 10 miles is just 10 minutes up the road in San Antonio, especially where I am. He's like, no.
Hundreds of thousands of people.
And he pulls up a map,
right?
And we do a report. And when I looked at the number of people that were in a 10-mile radius, I said, okay, 5? 5 was still too large.
Okay.
We ended up doing a 2-mile radius.
Sure.
And even at 2-mile radius, we're talking about 200,000 plus people
right.
to reach.
So the thing when I'm teaching this, I kind of say it this way. We're not even saying, radius. The 2-mile, I think, is really helpful for our listeners to kind of get their minds around. But also, this neighborhood down the street, we have no connection there. There's this elementary school within 3 blocks that we've never had any ministry in.
Right.
There's a brand new apartment complex down that kind of thing is how specific we're talking about when we say a new target group. Then a new set of strategies.
Absolutely.
So talk with us about a new set of strategies.
A new set of strategies includes vision. I like to put in a what is it? Plan out what you want to do.
Right.
Actually go and do what you want to do.
Right.
And then produce it and then cycle that again.
Right.
Again, Revitalization and Replanting have some strategies that help both sides.
Sure.
One of those are your key interviews that you teach.
Yeah. We talk about these 7 interviews. We'll do a whole podcast about that before too long, about how to really exegete the community by asking some civic community leaders some specifics and targeted ones. Tell us what is happening. Where is there darkness in this area that no one is shining the light of Christ? That sounds like a very Christian question, and they may not all be believers. So we ask a little bit different: what hidden problems exist in those community that you would know about because you're an EMT, but the basic person would not know about.
And so you ask a question, like you'll ask a pastor a question, what's the vision for the church?
Right.
What's the vision for Sesame Street Church, right? Oh, our vision is to grow and to evangelize and to do the things that churches ought to be doing.
Right.
So this new set of strategies teaches us how do we give real vision, give real direction, how do we do stuff, how do we do things intentionally, right?
So in other words, we're scrapping everything that has been.
Right.
The bylaws are gone. Right. The Constitution still remains. There might need to be some changes if the name of the church is going to change. And sometimes lawyers have to be involved in all this. But that's gone. All the old strategies, of the ministries that we were doing, those things are all gone. We're basically going to treat the church as if it fully died, even if there's 15, only 20 people left. But we're going to plant something. We're going to treat it inside your building just as if this is a brand new church.
Right.
Right. So a total, complete start over.
Complete start over.
Right. Right. Well, the reality is that about 80 to 90%, depending on which author you listen to, and it certainly has changed post-COVID, but, Rayner, Stetzer, New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary have all noted that between 80 to 90% of churches in America are plateaued or in decline. So almost every church, right, is either going to be a revitalization or a replant.
Correct.
Before we switch to revitalization, anything else about replanting that you want to talk about?
Replanting takes courage.
Yeah.
I think they both do.
Sure.
But replanting takes a lot of courage. Once you realize that your resources, your people, your vision, maybe even your spiritual and natural sense is very low.
Right.
There has to be some form of sense of purpose and call and boldness and courage to walk through this process.
Yeah.
It's some people argue it's not as heavy as revitalization, but either way, it's going to take an emotional strain, an emotional weight, or emotional intelligence to endure or go through any one of these processes.
And there, in most situations for replanting, there's going to be an assessment of a replanter.
Correct.
Right. And so Texas Baptist has a whole strategy to kind of help with that, help the pastor understand, am I a good candidate for replanting or not? And there's all kind of different assessments out there that can help.
Absolutely.
But ours is incredibly robust. I've been to those, and it is a wonderful process. But there's some serious evaluation to help a pastor understand, am I a good candidate to replant or am I not?
Right, because Texas Baptist BGCT, we desire to make sure we're sending off healthy planters that will have healthy churches.
Right.
We don't want to just provide a fresh start to an unhealthy person or place.
Yeah.
And so our ultimate goal is, even though a lot of people be like, why do I have to go through all of this? It's for us to assess how healthy this situation is so that we don't end up in the same space.
We know, and Pastor, that healthy churches are led by healthy pastors. It's just that simple. And so that's why an assessment, if you're with Texas Baptist or not, is really, really, really helpful to help you kind of get started. So let's talk. We're going to start transitioning over to talking about revitalization, but let's talk about some biblical imperative.
Sure.
So in the book of Revelation, chapter 2, we have the 7 churches of Revelation that Jesus directly addresses. The first one is the church at Ephesus. Of course, that's where the book of Ephesians comes from. And there's a phrase in there, as with many of the books, the churches in the book of Revelation, there's some praise for the church at Ephesus. But then there's a statement, right? And so if you're a preaching pastor, you already know where I'm headed, I would imagine. So the scripture says this, that at some point along the way, the church at Ephesus lost its first love. So he says, you must remember the height from which you have fallen.
Right.
because they have lost their first love. Now, there's some discussion, debate about what first love he's talking about. I think it's pretty clear that love for Christ, right? Like the great commandment is that we are to love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then our neighbor as ourself. The Great Commission is only a treatise on the second commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself is directly connected to take the gospel to all of the world, right?
Yes.
So for me, when I think about that church that has forsaken its first love, it's that we're no longer worshiping Christ, but we're also no longer advancing the gospel. Then the next thing that he says is repent, right? Repent and do the things you did at first. And then here's the key part for this revitalization replanting discussion. If you do not, I will come to you and remove its lampstand from its place. I just think it's important for us to say, as hard as this sentence is for me to get out of my mouth, because I don't like it, you know where I'm going, because I don't like it.
I know.
It is okay for churches to die because it is our holy God who extinguishes the light, removes the lampstand of a church when it no longer honors Christ, worships Christ, or advances his kingdom, right?
Right.
And so, Pastor, what we want to help you always avoid with these two ministries at Texas Baptist, Revitalization, PAVE is the Revitalization, then our replanting ministries, departments, teams, we want to help you before you get to the spot where it's too far gone. Does that make sense?
Right.
So let's transition and talk about revitalization a little bit. So if replanting is 25 people or fewer, then generally speaking, general rule of thumb we use at Texas Baptist to understand revitalization is probably going to be 50 people or more. And between 25 and 50, it's just going to be a toss-up. How many people are left? What's the remnant of people that are still there? And so on the revitalization side, we're also creating this. People don't understand replanting, right? Like we're starting a whole new church, Lee. Like with the remnant that's left, we're starting a whole new church, but we're going to do it with a new leader, the new set of strategies, as we talked about. You know, maybe with a new name. It sounds really radical,
Right.
because it is. I'm sure as you have these discussions with people, they're like, Lee, this sounds incredibly difficult, right? Revitalization is equally radical, or to some degree, maybe even more, because you still have to bring the same amount of change. You are still, in revitalization, going to create an entirely new church, as my friend Josh McDonald says, with your buildings, your budget, your people, and with you, right?
Right.
with whoever that pastor is. So that's why giving them some of these revitalization tools is really helpful and important.
Absolutely. And ultimately, Jonathan, here's something I was thinking about as you were talking. Truth versus time.
Okay.
Which one is the church really measuring their effectiveness off of?
Wow.
Is it the time that we've been alive,
Yeah.
or how true we're staying to our purpose,
Yeah.
our mission,
And
right?
how true are we to the Lord?
To the Lord, to ourselves. And
right.
that assessment in itself is a hard one.
Yeah.
If you have to sit down and ask yourself, are we still being true
Right.
to the Lord
Yeah.
in what we do, or are we just here because of time?
So my experience, speaking of time and revitalization, it's 7 to 10 years.
Absolutely.
It is a long, arduous, wonderful, glorious pathway. That's been my experience from stepping into a church that had 25 people, and 6 months before I became the pastor, $1.06, y'all, $1.06, and the Lord resurrected it to be a church that averaged, max out about 250, but we had almost 400 people who came to the church at least once a month. So if that's the length for revitalization, how long does it take to replant?
3 to 5.
Okay.
The goal is that by year 5, your church is sustainable,
Okay. Self-sustaining.
self-sustaining,
Yeah.
healthy. There are
Yeah.
no additional resources coming in.
Okay.
In replanting, there's resources that
Yeah.
come in. Not only are you getting a strategist, you may receive some support from sponsorships.
Right.
And
With Texas Baptist.
With Texas Baptist
Yeah.
and Texas Baptist pastors and churches
Sure.
who believe in the work, right?
Right.
But after 5 years, you and your
Yeah.
church should be able to sustain and be ready to do this for someone else.
And revitalization You don't get any of that.
Nothing.
Well, you in PAVE you get a cohort and a coach, which is incredibly helpful. But financially, again, it's your finances, your people. Whoever the pastor is going to be the one who's going to lead it, and it's going to be typically 7 to 10 years, which is a long time. So let's just bring a little bit of definition to it, okay? Revitalization in its simplest form is a church simply returning to prayer, discipleship, evangelism, missions, and I always like to say church planting. That's what a healthy church is eventually going to plant. That's it in short form. And so pastors will say, but we're doing all of those things. We are making disciples. We are evangelizing. We are involved with mission work. And typically by the time I will catch them on the backside of the life cycle, either in maintenance mode or preservation mode, they're still doing a lot of things. The church is really busy, but the church is not asking itself, are these ministries actually making a disciple?
Right.
I know churches that have gone 6, 7, 8 years without a single baptism. Why? Well, because ultimately the church is off mission, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so when the church is off mission, revitalization steps in to say we got to return to, not to the programs, right? Revitalization is not about taking this overly programmed church and stacking more programs on top of it. Mm-hmm. In fact, most churches, if they're going to revitalize, they're going to have to remove up to 70% of their current programming is going to have to go away.
Absolutely.
So that the people now can have the time to live missionally, to make disciples, to evangelize. So that's part of the definition. But in long definition, it's also, and this, if you follow or know anything about Texas Baptists, this should be no surprise that I'm going to use this wonderful long word. It is the autonomous work. Right? It's the autonomous work. That's right. It is the autonomous work of the local church with little to no outside influence or funding. In other words, in revitalization, compared to replanting and revitalization, we're going to say there's still enough people here. Mm-hmm. There's still enough leadership oomph. Is not a very technical phrase, but it paints a picture. There's still enough people here that are young enough and have the energy. There's still enough finances for the church as the body of Christ to start working towards growth once again. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And one writer said it like this: reviewing your Ephesus analogy, or when you no longer desire to be light, God must remove the lampstand.
Right.
He removes the lampstand from places that no longer desire to be light.
Right.
And the question is, in revitalization, do we have enough people who still desire to be light?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Or enough people who can be led there.
Or led there.
Led there once again.
Right.
But we've used the word remnant a couple of times, and when you have the right person or people who are part of that remnant who say, yes, we can do this, man, it's a powerful dynamic. It reminds me, we were talking earlier about one of Jesus's lesser known parables. It's the parable of the yeast. And in the parable of the yeast, Jesus is talking about this woman who mixes some yeast into a dough. Now, I'm not much of a baker. My wife is, but I'm not much of a baker. And so I just remember my favorite professor ever, sorry to all my other professors, my favorite Christianity professor ever is Dr. David Capes. I was a graduate of Houston Baptist University. And he said that the amount of yeast used in that story was so ridiculous to the original hearers that even in a small, tiny little room like this would have been their home. The image to the original hearers is so much yeast was mixed into this dough that the dough is going to squirt out of the doors and squirt out of the windows, right? Because that's the nature of the yeast of the kingdom. When a church in revitalization, when you have even just a few remnant of people left who say, Pastor, we have got to take the gospel message forward. That's one of the things I'm really looking for in revitalization, right?
Absolutely.
Is there a patriarch or a matriarch or someone who has had influence in this declining congregation for years who alongside you will pick up the mantle and say, the gospel's not finished in us. The gospel's not finished in our community. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And even now, one of the trending words is revival.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, revival is trending again.
Okay.
And some churches are looking for revival. I want to say something kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Either you're replanting or you're revitalizing.
Right.
The middle ground is not revival. The
Right.
middle ground is remaining.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to choose.
Yeah.
Are we in the middle ground of just remaining until we no longer exist?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or are we replanting or revitalizing? And the truth is, revitalization is not a one-time thing.
Right.
A church should always be considering.
Yeah. How do we innovate?
How do we innovate?
How do we innovate? Yeah. We have an innovative, just look around us.
Right.
We have an innovative Savior. We have an innovative Creator God. So why wouldn't we thinking about innovating? Yeah. So, Dr. Tom Rainer often says on his podcast, he just has a way of boiling it down. He says it this way: change or die.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Change or die.
Change or die. So in revitalization, what we're saying is the church is going to have to significantly change. We're going to have to we're returning, not talking about missions, but doing it.
Correct.
Right? We're going to return not talking about evangelism, but doing it. But we're discovering in PAVE, you're a PAVE coach, and so in PAVE we put pastors in a cohort. People hear cohort, they think education. We're quick to say our PAVE cohorts is not so much educational. These are cohorts of practicing.
Yes.
We're going to walk alongside you and help you with you've heard the term theopraxis. We're going to work on the praxis with you. A little bit of theology and a whole lot of practice. So they have a cohort, some brothers to walk alongside them. They also are given a coach like yourself who is, our requirements are you've either revitalized a church, you've led a healthy growing church, or you have a high level of education in revitalization, which is a new concept. Revitalization is only about 10 years old,
Right.
since that term has been around. But what we're seeing is that after 1 year of cohort and coaching, about 86%, this is the research they're telling us, they're responding to us at the 1 year mark, 86% are saying that they're seeing some revitalization progress. This is what I'm convinced of, Lee. Pastor, if you're listening, this is what I'm convinced of. When we refocus the church on the gospel, everything changes.
Yes.
The church rises and falls on the gospel. The gospel is what your church needs. If the church is in decline, the church needs to be reminded of the goodness, the glory of Christ and His gospel. And what we're seeing is when churches get back to that kind of focus, some of them turn slowly, some of them turn quickly, but the key marker is changed lives, right? When we begin to see people who are being reached who have not been to church or are unchurched, and we see those baptism waters start to be stirred, man, something clicks in that congregation. They're reminded this is the reason that we're here to begin with.
Absolutely. And another point, when we were, when you and I were kind of discussing, like, hey, can we really find revitalization in the Bible, right?
Right.
We were looking for examples and
Yeah.
talking through theories and things like that. Here's something from the Nehemiah story.
Yeah, right.
He rebuilds the wall.
Yeah.
He has to rebuild it with the people that are there.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so something that got highlighted to me was it was revitalization. The resources, the people, everything
Yes.
was just already right there.
Right.
Here's what I got excited about today that I maybe never had really considered before is that Nehemiah was more focused on giving fresh energy to people who had already given
Yeah.
to a situation,
Right. Right.
had given their life to it.
Yeah.
This process had been long already, but before he went out to go reach new people, he refreshed and renewed the spirit of those
Yeah.
who had already given a lot to that season.
And that is revitalization because you're walking alongside, generally speaking, an older congregation that has been amazingly faithful.
Right.
They have been faithful. They have been faithful to God. They have been faithful to the church. They have been faithful to the gospel. But it's just that even at the 10-year mark, I know churches that at the 10-year mark of their existence have to get back to evangelism
Right.
and discipleship, right? Worship. We tend to really quickly, we drift. I remember a story from my childhood. We were at the beach, and my mom and dad were there, and I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and I was allowed to be out in the water by myself. And after about 10 minutes, I looked up, and I couldn't see my parents. And my dad, all of a sudden I look up, I see my dad with a stern face walking towards me. He's like, "Son, you see where we are over here? Look how far you've drifted." And I'm like, okay. So we walked back over, and he said, "Son, now when you're swimming and playing, just pop up every now and then and see where we are and get readjusted." 10 minutes pass, I look up, I can't see my parents. My dad with this angry face is coming towards me. We drift, right?
Yeah.
But our Heavenly Father is always calling us back. He's always calling us back with this mandate and a message, right? And to be sure, churches that are in decline to the point where they need to be revitalized or replanted, there's going to be some level of disobedience to the Great Commission in there. And that's people say, wait, disobedience to the Great Commission. Yeah, it is a command. Not only in Matthew's gospel, but also in Acts 1:8. In each one, you will be my witnesses. You will, right? Yeah, right. So there's no wiggle room. There's no gray matter in that.
Right.
Either you are obedient or disobedient, and we find churches that are in this kind of decline that have for sometimes for generations have been ignoring or disobedient to God's Great Commission.
And Jonathan, one thing I would want to say to pastors that are listening or viewing, it's pace, not race.
That's good.
Right? It's pace, not race. And when you think about one of the miracles of the Bible, Peter walking on the water,
right?
Everybody always says, oh, he lost his faith. He took his eyes off Jesus. No, the truth is he started paying too much attention to what was going on around him.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how many times as a pastor are we, especially in this age of social media,
sure,
we're looking at what the other pastor is doing, what
Yep.
the other church is promoting, how they're, and then we look at ourselves, and because of what we see going on around us, it causes us to take our eyes off the truth.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, it's pace, not race, and then making sure that we're not impacted by what's going on around us, because your revitalization project is going
Yes.
going to take a lot of intentional focus, and it's going to require you to just really go all in on your people and on the purpose and your passion that Christ has called you to.
Yeah, and it's about leading. So many pastors will say to me, "Well, I just got to preach better, or preach stronger, or preach longer." And man, I wish that was the answer.
Yeah.
It's just not about preaching. If we do anything well in Christendom, in church life, it's preaching, right? It's leading. That's the area that revitalization does not happen on the back of good preaching. It happens on the back of stellar, excellent leading. And because revitalization is kind of a new concept and idea, most pastors aren't versed in it.
Right.
That's where something like PAVE steps in is incredibly helpful
Absolutely.
to give you some of the tools that you need to take those next steps forward. So last thing, we'll wrap this up. One of the things that is true in both arenas that we see is that, because people will say, well, revitalization, we've used a lot of numbers today about how many attenders and how many baptisms and all that. It's just about the numbers. You're just a numbers person. You know how I answer that? It might surprise you. Yes. That's what it's about.
Yes.
That's what it's about. You know why? Because the mandate of the Lord, right? We see it in several different ways, but in John 15:5, those who are his followers will produce much fruit.
Yes.
Apart from me, you can do nothing. And that's part of the problem, is that for many churches who need revitalization or replanting, the mission has become too small. The mission has become manageable. And the reality is that the mission of Christ, humanly speaking, is impossible to accomplish. It's only by the power of the Holy Spirit. But there's this connection I see. Spiritual decline leads to numerical decline.
Correct.
Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as a church, in its spirit and its obedience, in its holiness, in the way that it practices justice and mercy and kindness and humility, as those spiritual dynamics, as the fruit of the Spirit begins to decline in the church, the numbers follow.
Absolutely.
Often because the church is so upside down.
The gospel is full of disruptive decisions
Right.
or radical moments.
Yeah.
Jesus was a disruptor. He's very radical. He does nothing
Absolutely.
status quo.
Right.
Then the
Right.
disciples become radical.
Yeah.
And so much so that the Bible and the New Testament deals with numbers a lot.
Sure. And we're sitting here and podcasting today because of Jesus's original work with the disciples, right? So let's wrap this up. Let's kind of let's just remind them. Replanting. Generally speaking, it's going to be just a small remnant of people, 25 people or less. Depending on the size of your facility. I know some churches that have, seating capacity for 1,000, 1,500. You might replant with a few hundred people left in that instance, right? Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, for a normative size facility of 300 or less, it's going to be when a church gets down to 25 or fewer, and that this is the last opportunity for us to use this space for the glory of God.
Correct.
In revitalization, it's a little bit different. There's probably 50 or more people, but the church just is not firing on all of its missional cylinders any longer. And so we're wanting to take the church back to evangelism, discipleship, right? But you're going to do that. You're going to do revitalization with your people, your budget, your buildings, your bylaws, and any other word that starts with a B. I'm not sure, but it's going to go that way, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Lee, thanks for your time today. Thanks for your expertise. We want to throw you a closing question. All right, what we do sometimes on the Pay podcast. So I'm going to ask you this.
Boy.
Well, here it is. What is your pet peeve? What just gets under your skin? What really aggravates you? I'll tell you one of mine is when you use the microwave and you only use it, you put 30 seconds on it, but you only need 14 seconds and you open the door and it's flashing, 16 seconds, that number. That's my pet peeve. What's your pet peeve?
Oh, boy. Who would ever thought you and I have the same pet peeve?
Really?
I can't stand that. But I think one of my other pet peeves would be people who, oh man, this is going to get me.
Just go for it. We can always edit it if we need to.
We can just edit it if we need to.
Edit it out. Yeah.
I've got pet peeves about people who open stuff and don't finish it.
Okay.
If you're going to open up a bottle of water, don't take 2 sips and just leave the bottle of water sitting there for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
If you're just finish it. I've got kids and grandchildren.
Yeah.
And so we just start buying the little bottles.
Okay.
I feel a little bit better.
You know what I do with that leftover water? I water my plants or water my. I don't want it to go to waste, so I go sit. That's right. Well, thanks for listening to the PAVE podcast today. You can learn more about Texas Baptist by going to txb.org. If you would like an assessment of your church, often if you are in church revitalization or in church replanting, you need some outside eyes to help you. So we want to offer you at Texas Baptist the opportunity for an assessment. If you are interested in a revitalization assessment, you can send an email to pave@txb.org, pave, P-A-V-E, at txb.org, or you can go to the PAVE site at Texas Baptist, txb.org/PAVE. If you're interested in a church replanting assessment, where do they go, Lee?
Lee.Williams@txb.org.
Spelled just the way that it sounds, nothing unusual. L-E-E, right? Yeah. Lee.Williams@txb.org. Thanks for listening today. Lee, thanks for your expertise.
Thanks, Jonathan.
And we'll see you next time.
Yes.